All right. Are we ready?
Yes, we are.
So, hello and a very good evening, each one of you. Thank you, first of all, for joining us today. And today's session is going to be a yet another learning session, yet another inspirational session, and yet another brilliant session with a brilliant speaker that we have here with us, Advocate Vinay Vyas. I will not talk much about him. I will let Premraj ji do the honors, but I will surely tell you that how happy we are at Power Up to have these personalities come and share their journey and a lot of things about their domain to us. And it also makes us aware as a layman when we do not understand so many things, and especially law is something that everyone is very much interested. So thank you, Vinayji, for being here with us. Let me just introduce a little bit about Power Up, what Power Up is all about. We are a group of entrepreneurs, and I must tell you, each entrepreneur in this group is completely enthusiastic. And this is growing only because every member here vouches for the other member. We are here to grow together, to collaborate, to co-create, and to create such kind of synergies that helps each one of us grow our businesses, and hence uh, I can call it a successful platform today. So, with all of you being here, let me now put us across to Premraj ji, and I will introduce him. You have by now, you all know him that he's an author and a futurist speaker on leadership and management. He has spent 37 years in the banking with experience in public and private sector. He was also the CEO of the BPO arm of a leading private sector bank. He's co-authored 3 books. All 3 have hit the number 1 spot on Amazon best-selling list. Views expressed by Prem Raj have been published in Economic Times, Business Standard, Financial Express, Indian Express, Mumbai Mirror, and other periodicals. Prem Raj hails from Mumbai and resides with his wife, son, daughter-in-law, mother-in-law, and pet cat-in-law. Over to you, Prem Rajji, and we are waiting for this exciting session to start.
Thank you, Jaya. Thanks a lot. We have today on the show Vinay Vyas, who is a corporate lawyer. He's been in this field for over 30 years. He has been practicing in the Mumbai High Court as a senior advocate. Apart from Mumbai, he has plied his trade in various courts of the country. Apart from being a legal eagle, he is also passionate about traveling. He has traveled extensively across the country and has also visited 31 different countries, many of them multiple times. He is happily married to Namrata, a college professor. They have a son, Ayush. Welcome to the show, Vinay.
Thank you, Premraj. Thank you so much. And thank you, Power Up. And thank you, Jaya Opan, for inviting me to this platform.
Pleasure, sir.
So let's start now. We see there are different courts in the country. How many courts are there? Can you explain its hierarchy?
Okay. Premraj and all friends, good evening to all of you. It's really very heartening to be with all of you. And I'm really happy that so many of you are here to get some knowledge on the legal side of our system. Talking about the different courts that are existing, say for Mumbai, you see a court in Borivali, you see a court in Andheri, Bandra, and you are confused why so many courts are there around. And similarly, in a smaller town or district, also there are different courts. Primarily, the courts are divided into 2 major aspects. One are civil courts, another are criminal courts. And hierarchy starts right from the top, where we have at Delhi the apex court called Supreme Court of India, which is supreme body, under which we have 25 high courts in the various states. And below the high court, in a city like Mumbai, we have city civil and sessions court, which deals with civil cases as well as criminal cases. And below city civil and sessions court, we have a metropolitan magistrates court. Like you see, There are 16 metropolitan court center in Mumbai, like that Borivali, Andheri, Bandra, Mulund, and all. There are 16 centers. So all these metropolitan courts are having jurisdiction over criminal matters, and about 4 to 5 police stations are assigned to each of the courts. So criminal matters pertaining to these police stations are taken care and tried by the magistrates having jurisdiction over these courts for better administration purpose. So they are called metropolitan magistrate in a city like Mumbai or a metropolitan city. Same thing at a district level. We have judicial magistrate first class handling the same thing, having jurisdiction over different police station. Above metropolitan courts, you have a right to file appeal in Mumbai, which is Sessions Court, Mumbai Sessions Court, which has its branch at Dindoshi as well. And in district, we have district courts above judicial magistrate first class for criminal matters where one can file appeal. Apart from having appellate jurisdiction, this sessions court as well as district court also has certain cases which are tried exclusively by these courts. So offenses which are punishable with imprisonment of more than 7 years, imprisonment with life, or with death penalty are tried only by these district courts or sessions court at Mumbai. And certain offenses like POSCO, like MPID, PMLA, Prevention Money Laundering Act, TADA, MOCACA, all these special courts are also sitting at district level and sessions court. So they are tried directly by them. And above them, the appellate jurisdiction is with High Court. And with the permission of the Supreme Court, one can always go to Supreme Court where substantial question of law is involved by seeking a permission called special leave petition. So this is a hierarchy in criminal courts. Civil courts also the same thing. The hierarchy is there. There is Supreme Court, there's a High Court. Below that, there are district courts. Here in Mumbai City Civil Court, it is called. And in district, there are below that, there are civil judge junior division and civil judge senior division. So apart from major two sides of law, civil and criminal, there are certain courts called family courts dealing with disputes relating to divorce, family matters. There are courts relating to labor matters, labor courts are there. There are consumer forums also at different levels dealing with Consumer Protection Act and all. So that's why you see different courts at different places. In a place like city of Mumbai where there is a limited space, you see courts are scattered at different places. But in a taluka or district level, usually these courts are at one center. Like if you go to Pune Shivaji Nagar Center of Courts, you will see district courts, you will see JMFC, you will see civil judge junior division, senior division, there are revenue courts, there are family courts at one center. So that's the answer to your first query, Primraj, why there are different courts and how's the hierarchy.
Thanks, Vinay. That's quite a wide web in the hierarchy that we have. I always used to wonder as to why these courts are all spread around. Thanks for explaining that.
My pleasure.
For cases that go to court, why is that in the initial period, no hearing happens except for fresh dates of appearances given to both parties? It's like that tariq pe tariq.
All right.
Why does this happen?
Yeah, okay. See, for those who understand the nitty-gritties involved in a case trial, whether civil or criminal, there are different stages of a case. In a civil case, once you file a suit for any relief that you are seeking, the parties are served with the notice called writ of summons. After receipt of the summons, the defendant against whom the suit is filed has a right to file his defense by way of a written statement within 30 days. If he fails to file, he can still seek permission of the court, which will grant him the permission, extension of next 60 days to file written statement. And once the written statement is filed, court will identify the issues involved in a case, like things which are admitted need not be proved. So what are the issues arising out of the case which is filed by one person? Based on the answer, which is the defense which is filed by the defendant and the case filed by the plaintiff, Court will identify some critical issues which need to be proved, and court also cast burden of proof upon the parties, whether party A proves this, whether the party B proves this. So depending upon their averments, the court will decide whose burden is to prove. So till the time these formalities are completed and the case is ready for a trial, like to go for evidence, where usually examination of witness, cross-examination takes place. Once the evidence stage is complete, the matter is thereafter posted for argument and therefore judgment. So I do not know what, according to you, is a hearing, whether it is examination of parties that is happening. So unless and until the pleadings are complete, unless and until the documentation and the earlier formalities are complete, the cases are not taken up for hearing. So though the date is given, though the case is adjourned, it is progressing in some or other way in completing those formalities.
Oh,
In a criminal case also, the same thing happens. Service of the summons, the party appears in person, then the charge is explained whether he pleads guilty or not. If he decides to plead not guilty, then the complainant is invited to file evidence before the court and all. So till the time the preparatory work is done, the matters are adjourned for with some directions in the cases to complete those formalities. So they're not simpliciter adjournment with nothing, but then with direction to proceed further to the next level. So that's why
yes.
we see the dates are being given or matters are being adjourned before the actual hearing takes place.
Yeah, thanks for explaining, because I always used to wonder, because as a branch manager, I had filed many cases, criminal cases in courts, and then you find you have been transferred to different centers, and about 5 to 7 or 10, even up to 10 years later, the first time the court calls you. I was always wondering why this happens, and then in between you get that dates. That's it.
The matters are adjourned for several reasons. Sometimes the judges are transferred. Sometimes the parties
Yeah,
are seeking adjournments for whatever reason, one or other party seeking adjournment. And
that explains a lot of
also,
things.
yeah, that's true.
Courts having vacation is a colonial legacy. Any moves to do away with vacations? This could also help, because we have a huge backlog of cases pending. What is your view on this, please?
Uh, you are right, Premraj. There's a huge backlog of cases. Probably by 2017 data reveals that about 2.74 crore cases are pending. By now, it would have been probably much more than that. Uh, the pendency, the reason about pendency of cases, as I was mentioning, varies. You know, it depends upon the parties, because who seeks adjournments because the council is busy, because the party is not well. Sometimes, you know, for flimsy reasons, they keep because against the person against whom the case is filed, he is interested in prolonging the matter, so they seek adjournments and all. There are various reasons which can be ascribed for pendency. So far as the vacations are concerned, we are having about in High Court, uh, courts are working days in High Court ranging from 200 to 205, 210 working days in a year, and Supreme Court around 180 days, 80 working days in a year. Now people say that when there are holidays, why can't the court work and try to dispose of cases? Several attempts have been done by several judges attempting to have a morning court, attempting also to have an evening court and all, but they were not successful in the past. The experience were not so good. Also, the judges of the Supreme Court and the High Court, they are every day hearing 80, 90 cases. Uh, Not that, on a holiday they are free. Even on a weekend, they carry the papers home for being ready with the briefs, because on an admission day, there are about 70, 80 cases they have to dispose of. They have to go through each and every case papers and be ready with the queries. Not that, each matter is granted a long time to be heard at an admission stage. So, most of the judges, they either get up at 4 o'clock to read the papers or they read at night until 2 o'clock. So even after going back home, the work doesn't stop. They carry the matter even while sleeping, because they have to read a lot. And uh, even after hearing the argument for passing the judgment and orders, it requires a lot of going through the papers and applying the mind, considering arguments of both the sides, considering also the different judgments which were cited before them. So all this time is also consumed at home doing this exercise, because the working time is not used for reading and drafting the judgments and all, which are usually used only for creating creativity in the court. So practically speaking, these vacations are needed for the judges and also for the lawyers who are regularly practicing, because the work doesn't stop. As I said, the thinking process always continues, even after going home or even on a vacation sometime, and even on weekends. But then yes, what can be done about reducing the filing of court cases? uh, there are certain petty offenses, petty cases, court can reduce the burden of. Recently, Nirmala Sitharaman, if you must have read about some corporate offenses, companies offenses have been taken off, and there was move to, reduce, like convert them into civil things, which can be compounded at a departmental level, thereby reducing the burden of the court drastically. Because there are several cases under Companies Act which are pending and no progress is being made, under Income Tax Act and so many other economic offenses, where things can be done by paying fine or compounding at a department level. So by reducing the burden of petty offenses and petty cases, one can reduce the burden. Secondly, there are certain criteria set up by the High Court of giving points to the judges for disposal. Now, if these criterias can be, little bit modified, whereby the judges are incentivized, for disposing more cases, and that gives them more points and probably some incentives, that can also happen. Thirdly, I feel for reducing the court cases, uh, I think the procedure for the trial need to be simplified. What laws we are implementing currently are the laws which are there probably since 100 more than 100 years, set up by British governments, Indian Penal Code, Indian Evidence Act, and all. So if the laws are modified considering the current scenarios and circumstances, and also the procedure is simplified, then for the trial, the cases can be heard expeditiously, I think, and that will help for reducing the court cases. And also digitization of the court cases, like today in a lockdown time when we were thinking of taking up the hearing by video conferencing. Only certain number of high courts and Supreme Court were taking up the hearing by video conferencing, and that was not happening either at the district level or at the metropolitan magistrates level, or a JMFC level. So if all the courts preparing that, if that can happen, digitization, computerization and all, then that will also help. But Supreme Court is passing directions time and again for expeditious hearing, for simplifying the procedures. Now recent direction has been passed by Supreme Court of service of summons by way of email, by WhatsApp. All this has been accepted, are towards the direction of expediting the hearing in the case. So I'm sure in coming times things will improve, surely.
Thanks for putting that in perspective. We know now judges and lawyers work very hard and they have to put in extra hours. Till now, I was thinking only private sector bankers work long hours. Now, let's move to something that interests the rest of the general public. What are the requirements of a will?
It is very simple and very easy for a person to make a will. First of all, will is not required to be made on any stamp paper. Will must be in writing. It can be typed or it can be in writing. There is no legal language prescribed for drafting a will. So you don't require to learn a legal language or a special skill for drafting the will. So there are no specific requirement for preparing a will. What is required is it must be in writing. It must disclose the person's intentions, the testator's intention, how, and it must be relating to his movable and immovable properties. So any person who is competent to sign a contract, that is person who is above 18 years of age, minor cannot make a will. Person who is of a sound mind can make a will, a simple will in writing, pertaining to his property and his intention as to whom he wants to give the property. He may be the legal heir, may not be a legal heir. It is his own wish to make a will pertaining to his own property. But the most important thing about a will is that will is required to be attested by at least two witnesses. So there must be two persons, independent persons who have seen you signing the will and who signed simultaneously in your presence. So once you completed the will, you sign in presence of the witnesses and the witness also signs in your presence. So what is required is minimum two witness. Will must be in writing. That's are the only requirement for drafting of the will.
Just an offshoot of that, if it's a handwritten will, and if the person who makes the will forgets to sign it, but it's attested by two witnesses, will that be a valid will?
I'm sorry. That will not be considered as a valid will. Because
Even though it's handwritten by him?
even if it is handwritten and unless it signs, he is really not putting it into perspective. He is not. There is no legacy that he is giving by not signing.
Okay. Okay, then now, is a will required to be registered? What are the pros and cons of registering and not registering?
Okay. Registration Act, under the Registration Act, registration of a will is optional. It is not required mandatorily to be registered. There are no cons of registering the will, but there are definitely pros. Once the will is registered, then there are lesser chances of any dispute arising later on amongst the legal heads who, whenever there are conflicts, that the will was signed under undue influence or will was signed when the testator was not keeping well or was not of a sound mind, something. So there are these allegations which are happening when the legatee is going to the court claiming probate or right in the property, and when there are disputes amongst legal heads, then these sort of questions arises. So the benefit of registering will is that all these things, that the person was under undue influence or under force that will was signed are taken away. Person is present before the registrar and he has signed the will before the registering authority. So the dispute about execution of the will is not available later on, to any of the legatees to conflict. These issues then are not available. So the best thing one should do is to register a will, and also it is advisable that each individual having a property, movable or immovable, must make a will to avoid problems later on.
Okay. Then what about revocation of will? How is that to be done in case you want to change a will or revoke a will?
Right. Will can be revoked by making another will, or if there are no copies made, will can be revoked by simply tearing of the will, or by preparing a document stating that the will which was made has been revoked, cancelled. So thereby you can revoke the will. So will can be revoked either by making a statement in writing again that the earlier will dated so has been revoked and cancelled. Or if there are no copies made, one can simply tear off the will, it will be revoked. Or thirdly, by making another will. The will which is latest by date will be the last will and testament, which will be considered as a valid will. And all earlier will be termed as a revoked will.
And in case a person has not made a will, how will the property devolve?
Yeah. So this takes us to the testamentary dispositions under Hindu Succession Act. In case a male Hindu dies without making a will, what happens to his immovable properties? His immovable property will be divided equally amongst the first class 1 legal heirs of the deceased male, and the class 1 legal heirs of the deceased male Hindu are the widow, son or daughter, son and daughter, and the mother of the person who has died, but not the father. So, the person who has died, Hindu, his mother, his wife, son, and daughter are the class 1 legal heirs. Each one of them will divide the property equally amongst themselves when there is no will in place. When there is will, it will be the disposition given under the will as per the desire of the person dying. But when there is no will made, then each one of them will take equal. Now, suppose and surviving. Suppose the mother is not surviving, then there will be three shares: son, daughter, and the widow. If the widow is not there, only son and daughter, and both will take equally. Suppose the son of the person dying has expired, then his widow, the daughter-in-law, and the son and the daughter of the deceased son will be entitled for their father's share in the property, not equal, but one share in the property. And so far as the daughter is concerned,
I'm
her
sure.
husband will not take any share in the property if the daughter dies, married daughter dies, and then her husband, but only the son and the daughter will take the mother's right in the property. This is how the property is divided amongst class 1 legal heirs.
Quite elaborate. We hear about two terms that come up always. One is probate, and other is succession certificate. Can you explain these two terms for?
By the competent court, and along with the right of administration over the property. Probate is granted to a person called executor who is named as an executor in the will. So while drafting a will, you will name who will execute the will. A person who is confident, who is your confidant, whom you rely upon, whom you feel that he will do justice to my will and will share the property amongst my legal heirs as per his desire specified in the will. So he's named as an executor in the will, executor
Mhm.
or executors. Sometimes the executor can also be the legal heir. So the executor approaches the court for granting of probate. The will which is certified and accepted as a genuine will by the High Court and certified as a genuine will is called probate. But along with that, coupled with as a right to administer the property, that is called probate. Now, sometime the executor who has been named in the will dies, and he is not available to execute the will. So he
Mm.
cannot go to court to seek a probate. So what will happen? And sometimes even if there is an executor appointed, he is either old or infirm or is unwilling to execute the will or act as an executor. In that event, the legal heir goes to court along with the will, saying that this is the will and I am one of the legal heir. Please grant me the right to administer the property. So that is called letter of administration, granted in case there is a will. So there is a probate which is granted along with administration right to the executor in the absence of any executor being named in the will, or the executor not available is unwilling to execute the will. The right of administration is granted also to the legal heirs, which is called a letter of administration. So this is probate and a letter of administration doing the same thing, giving the right to administer the property as per the will to the legal heir or to the executor. And there is third thing connected with it is called succession certificate. Sometime because you are a banker, in a banking parlance, a person, the account holder or a fixed deposit holder, or in a company, the shareholder expired without making a will. And there are movable assets, securities, fixed deposits, bank accounts, money lying in bank accounts. So the bank or the company will ask the legal heirs to go and obtain a succession certificate. So succession certificate is also certificate granted by the competent court, like High Court here, in a testamentary department, and which certifies who are the successor entitled to get right in the property, the movable assets. So what is granted by way of letter of administration is pertaining to movable and immovable both. But what is only relating to movable properties like shares, securities, fixed deposits is called succession certificate, and one can only ask for succession certificate. So these are the three terminologies connected with the will, probate, letter of administration, and a succession certificate.
Wow, that was well explained. Thanks for clarifying this. I have filed a nomination with the housing society where I reside. Do I still need to make a will to ensure the property is passed on to my heirs as per my wishes?
All right. This is very interesting question, Prebraj. Uh, Let us understand one thing, that nomination in a society is not a testamentary document. So you cannot give right in the property by way of making a nomination. Nomination is only a direction to the society in the event of the death of the member on in whose name the property would be transferred. But the nominee is required to hold the property in trust for the legal heir. So he is only a trustee of the flat to hold the same for the benefit of the legal heirs. He may be a legal heir, he may not be a legal heir. And therefore, whether even if you have made a will and there are different legal heirs, it is advisable, even if you have made a nomination in respect of, say, one person, and there are different legal heirs, it is advisable that if you want to restrict the testamentary right, then you must make a will as per your desire and wish as to who you think should inherit your property after your death. In the absence of a will, simply nomination will only entitle the society to transfer the flat in the name of the nominee, but that nominee will not have any right to deal with the property, right either to give it on a license, legal license, or a rent it out, right to sell the property, because he is only a legal heir, he is only a trustee in respect of the property, and that the property will be the person will be treated died as intestate without making a will. So uh, it will be all the legal heirs of the class one. If they are alive, then they will share equal right in the property.
Thanks for
And one
explaining
thing
that.
also we must understand about nomination, sometimes which nobody is aware, and there's a common mistake which I've seen. The property or a flat is jointly owned by either the father and a son or a husband and a wife, most of the time. But there is only one nomination signed by both the joint holders of the flat. Now, this is not correct way of making a nomination. Each one of them must make a separate nomination with respect to their share in the property. So if no right of share is described in the agreement, they both will take equal share in the property. So if the husband and wife is there, then they must make separate nomination in respect of their share in the property, whether husband and wife or father and son or whoever are the joint holders. Maybe there are three brothers, then there must be three separate nominations forms should be filed by the society. There cannot be a common nomination form uh, which can be acted upon.
Even if it is, if the husband and wife are owning joint properties and it's a common nominee, still you need to file two nomination forms.
Uh, if there is a common nominee, then there is no need, according to me.
No issue.
Signed by both of them, there is a common nominee, then there are no disputes about it.
Okay, thanks. Now, a general question. People are apprehensive about court appearances. What can be done to make court appearances more pleasant? It's a general question.
Okay. I would agree with you. First and foremost, to give a pleasant experience, ambience is very, very important. Like you go to a nice hospital, which does not have a hospital kind of environment, and ambience is good. your tension is reduced, your stress level is reduced, with an ambience itself. And unfortunately, in India, the judiciary, we have failed to create such kind of ambience which makes it a stress-free environment for the litigants in the court. But then, what can be done is that if the staff and the presiding officers, treat the litigants nicely, and give them the answer which they are expecting, that will make a lot of difference. Sometimes the officers of the court, sometimes the departmental staff, they do not give proper answer, which they usually would give it to lawyers and not to the litigants. uh, Maybe because they are busy, and maybe because the litigants are unable to understand the nitty-gritties involved and asking silly questions.
Yes.
uh, but then, the attitude must change according to me. And even if the witness standing in a box, if the judges make them comfortable, uh, with their softness as a witness, that will make a lot of difference. That will make them comfortable, will make them give statement fearlessly, to see the approach of the judge. So I think corrective steps are definitely required to give a pleasant court experience. And each one of us, whether are part of, we are also officer of the court. We are equally responsible for giving such experience to our litigants, our clients, ensuring that they are not harassed, ensuring that they don't simply sit or come to court, sit inside the court, waste their time, uh, sitting and doing nothing, waiting for their turn to come when their presence is not really required. So avoiding to call them to court is one should do unless really needed, and unless they are interested to participate in the court proceedings.
Okay. My final question to you before I hand over to Jaya. It's a bit of a personal question. What are your future plans after hanging your boots as a legal luminary? Politics, professional speaker, or what?
Okay, not thought of becoming a very professional speaker, but then I will not hang my boots till the time I am physically active. I'll continue to work. May not be as much as what I'm doing now, but then I will pursue my hobbies, my reading hobbies, my traveling hobbies. I want to explore the world. Still, there are certain part of the world which I'm not explored. Even in India, I'm not explored. So I would want to do that. And to cater to my needs and take care of all these expenses, I need to continue to work so far as my health permits. And I'll continue to take care of my health so that I can enjoy life as much as I can. So no scope of hanging up the boots
Yeah.
till the time I can.
That's nice. That's nice. Now I hand over to Jaya, who will take over for some time before handing over back to me for winding up. Over to you, Jaya.
All right. So I came on the video, then I again went back because I thought that last bit was interesting. Let people have the focus with Mr. Vyas. Thank you, Mr. Vyas. It was a wonderful, wonderful session from your end. But I think there are going to be loads of questions. Let's try and quickly take them, and let's see how many we can take. So, Dr. Jagannath Rao says, "Wow, what a great session! A great question and a wonderful answer." He also says, "Sir, if a will is made and registered, and then a few years later another will is made but not registered, then which of the two wills is valid? Please let me know." Simply great. The session is turning out to be more and more informative. Thanks, Vinay. So that's his feedback, but that's his question. Is there something
A
that?
very valid, very interesting question that he has asked. Uh, See, as I said earlier, the last will, whether registered or not, because the registration is not compulsory. That last will, which is not registered, will be the will which will be accepted, and the earlier will, though registered, will be treated as revoked will.
Okay, okay, okay. I hope that answers you, Dr. Rao. He's also saying, is there a distinction between a lawyer and advocate about the fees charged by legal professions for their services? Are these defined or left to the discretion of the advocate of the case?
Yeah. Okay, there is no difference between the terminology lawyer and an advocate, but there is difference between a lawyer or an advocate and a solicitor. That's another degree in law, which one achieves by appearing for the solicitor's exam and passing out solicitors. Uh, so far as the fees aspect is concerned, there are different factors which are important. The fees are charged based on number of years experience, the seniority, and also the stakes involved in the matter. So higher the stakes, often there are higher fees involved, and the different lawyers, depending upon their caliber, their expertise, the number of years put in, will charge different fees. And as I said, if you are an expert in a matter, if you are able to handle the matter very well, if you are known, then you can charge the fees at the discretion of the lawyer. There are no standard fees prescribed either by the Bar Council or by any authority so far as legal fees are concerned.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vyas, for that. We also have another question from Asha Lataji. She says, can all judges practice law after retirement?
All the judges can practice law after retirement. So what happens, usually the lower court judges practice in the same court many a times. High court judges do practice in Supreme Court, and retired Supreme Court judges practice as an arbitrator sometime, or as a consultant, or hold different positions as a legal advisor, consultant, and all. They do practice. So all the judges they practice the law after retirement. Supreme Court judges retire at the age of 65. High Court judges retires at the age of 60, 63. So there is a lot of scope for them to work thereafter as well, depending upon. But usually you give their time sitting as a chairman of a legal commission, or as an arbitrator in a case and all. Usually Supreme Court judges don't practice in Supreme Court because that's not permissible. But then they do continue to practice as a lawyer in their expertise field or their choice.
Means once a lawyer is always a lawyer.
Yes, till the time you want to be.
If nothing, then at least always there to give advice. So sometimes we have certain cases in our society, and we have to coordinate with lawyers, and whether they charge the fees or not, they always want to help out in giving all the laws and bylaws and everything, that you can do this, you can't do that. So that's one thing I like about the lawyers, although I used to feel that no, maybe they are like, बहुत पैसा ही लेते होंगे, but I have come across some very, very good lawyers of late. And what I hear from you, I think you're doing so much justice to the profession. So thank you for, bringing that kind of benchmark today.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you.
All right, let's see if we have a few more questions. Otherwise, we will wind up. Okay, you could also unmute.
Right. Can I ask a question? Yeah.
Of course, Abhijit.
So, would you suggest going in for a lawyer which is a specialized one for a particular course, or would you suggest going in for somebody who's a generalist practicing everywhere?
No, I would prefer a specialized lawyer, because he is aware not only about the law, which he is specialized into, but then there are judgments of the higher court passed by either High Court or Supreme Court. He is day-to-day updated with those judgments and the latest rulings. With the general lawyer may not be aware, because it is very difficult to keep updated with different laws pertaining to different expertise. So general lawyer may be aware about most prominent judgments, and or he will start exploring after getting your matter, what are the recent judgments and all. But an expert is updated with the laws concerned therewith, and is also updated with the procedure involved in it, and sometimes has a face value before that particular court because he's an expert and having
Yeah.
frequent appearances. So he's aware about the moods and temperament of the judges and present your case well to cater to the need of the judge sometimes. So it is better to go with an expert
Perfect.
than a general lawyer.
Second is, what would be the pointers to select a good lawyer? Like you have a family doctor, so to have a family lawyer, so how would you select one, or where would you find good lawyers,
I agree with you.
and how do you find? Yeah,
This is very, very relevant questions, because by face or by board or by name, you cannot judge
yeah,
a lawyer, whether he is competent. Because if you go to some lawyer, will ask, do you handle these cases? He's bound to say yes. And which you really do not know whether he is an expertise or not. And he might explore with your case. So usually, one should go by recommendation. So if your friend or client or partners or any other known person has experienced some lawyer and is happy working with him, then that is the best reference one can get. Second thing, suppose you have a case, say at Borivali Court, and you do not know how to find a good lawyer. What you can do is go to the court and in a recess time catch hold of the person who is sitting next to the judge and calling out matters. Now these are the persons who see the lawyer every day appearing before the judge, getting an order, getting an answer, fighting different cases. So they are the best person to guide you in that particular court who is the best lawyer और किसका कार्ड चलता है ज्यादा. So often a time when I get a brief of other cities and I want to have a colleague with me to appear in that cases, I approach the staff to find one reliable lawyer practicing daily in that court, and I get reference from them, and then I connect with them, and I tie up with them for handling my cases. I go to argue and conduct the cases, day-to-day hearing, and dates he attends. So that's how I go about. So I think you can also do the same thing.
Hope that answers you. You're still on mute, Abhijit.
what do you think would be the future of justice in the post-COVID period? Do you see a lot of cases being decided like we have work from home? So, do you think virtual courts will come up and they will help dispense justice faster? So, you could see a sea change in the number of pending cases, which are oh, Tariq pe Tariq is just gone with Sunny Deol then.
See, because the court has not been able to dispose of cases for past 10 months and maybe another quarter, the backlog is definitely going to increase, and that will make them give longer dates because the courts are burdened with the number of cases, and that is the reason many times you get dates also. So judges are not to be blamed because one judge has to sometimes handle 300-350 cases in a day. How can he handle 300-350 cases, and he ends up adjourning 300 cases and taking up only 50 cases for hearing. And this is bound to happen when the problem is only because of the number of cases and limited number of courts or vacant courts. So what the higher ups in executives and judiciary must do is to ensure that there are no vacancies in the court. All courts are duly, judges are appointed, and also set up more number of courts so that the existing burden is divided amongst many, and thereby ensuring. I don't see virtual courts being established soon. It will take some time, but then this Corona lockdown has taught us a lesson that we need to improve our working so far as video conferencing is concerned, virtual courts are concerned. Some of the things which can be disposed of can be done. So that will definitely happen, and I think new directives will be passed sooner by the higher courts for expeditious hearing of the cases and removing petty cases from the courts and all.
Thank you, thank you. Quite insightful. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Abhijit. Thanks, Vinayji. We have a few more questions pouring in. Arvind says, what is the legal heir certificate And how is it different from succession certificate? In which situations nominees get precedence of ownership over legal heirs?
First answer, whether what is a legal heirship certificate? A heirship certificate or a legal heir certificate, and how is it different than succession certificate? Heirship certificate is granted only to declare who are the legal heirs. It does not grant you right of administration over the property. So if certain properties are to be, transferred after the death of the person, and if a heirship certificate is obtained, you can simply go to with the heirship certificate to the revenue department for transferring the land records in the name of the legal heirs. But then the right to administer the property, you will have to apply for letter of administration. Now, so far as the succession certificate is concerned, as I said, for movable properties, you have to obtain succession certificate. If you want to administer, if you want to encash the fixed deposit or sell securities or anything, then you will have to obtain succession certificate. That will give you right to uh, administer the movable properties, and because there is no will, the right will be granted as per the your entitlement, class 1 entitlements. So difference between legal heir or heirship certificate and a succession certificate. Am I clear? Your second question was, there
Ownership
was a
over
third.
legal heirs. Legal
Yeah,
heirs.
precedence, whether the nominee will get a precedence over the legal heir. Nominee will never get a precedence over the legal heirs. So even if, say, out of 3 sons, one son has been nominated as a nominee, he does not get any precedence just because he has been nominated as a nominee by the father. Or if non-legal heir has been nominated, some stranger has been nominated as a nominee, he does not get any precedence over the legal heirs where there is no will made. So ultimately, the legal heirs will take their rights as per the Hindu Succession Act. As per the class 1, equal share will be granted. No nominee will ever get any precedence over the legal heirs.
Got it. All right. Let's take the next question here. So Rajendra Mehra ji is asking any comments about practices of sabbatical.
I'm unable to understand the question. Sorry.
Hello.
Rajendra, can you unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Yeah. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
you're audible.
Yes.
Yeah. Abroad, particularly in USA, there is a practice that the judges and the chair professors, they are allowed to take a vacation for 1 full year after every 7 years with all expenses paid, and they can travel anywhere in the world to upgrade their experience and knowledge. What are your comments on this particular phenomena to be adopted here in India?
If I don't know whether any such practice is there abroad, I'm really not aware about it. But if adopted, it will surely be misused at the public expenditure. Should not be encouraged.
But it is very much relevant in USA. It is only available for chief justices and professors who have got a chair. That is, they have been nominated by the university. Anyway, another related question is regarding the practice of retirement age. I presume rather, that there is no retirement age for the chief justices in certain countries.
No, there is a retirement age. 65 is a retirement age.
That is in India.
Yes,
That is in
yes.
India. But in some other countries, they don't have a retirement age. Because see, the valuable experience the chief justices have got, that is really useful to the society. Probably that could have been the reason. Anyway, my question is over. You can take over.
I do not know that what one experienced person can do, the subsequent seniors in line cannot do. So it is like, stopping the others from taking your chair till the time you are incapable of delivering justice or you die. I think that's not the right system. The system which is adopted by our judiciary is the best, I think. And there is an hierarchy, well-defined hierarchy, and you can hold the post till the time certain age is there. And once you retire, the next senior judge will take place as a chief justice. And everyone is doing the job to the best of their abilities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take the next question. Okay, Rena says, an honor to hear you, Vinayji. Thank you. What happens when the parents have made a legal will to the children, one male child and one female child, and suddenly one of the children, male child who's married man with wife and child, passes away? Does the wife and child on the son get a share of the will being a part of the family?
All right. Uh, See, as I said earlier, the wife and the children of the deceased son will take the share of the deceased son. So suppose if there is a property and the widow is also expired and the property is given to the son and the daughter in by a will. So there is no question of a widow expired. So by a will, the property is given to the son and the daughter, I presume equally. And if the son expires, a married son expires, then the 50% right of the property will dwell upon his wife, that is daughter-in-law, and the children in an equal share. So they all three will take it equally in the 50% share of their father or husband, that is the son's share. 50% which is given to the daughter will remain with the daughter as it is. And if anything, and as a contra, if suppose the married daughter dies, who has been given 50% right in the property, husband does not get any right in the property, her children will get her share in the property. Am I clear? Have I answered your query?
Rena,
Yes,
I hope
yes.
that answers your question.
Yes, perfectly, sir. The question actually has a little more twist on that. So, if the daughter has raised a case saying that the will clearly mentions only the son and the daughter, so I am not okay with giving the amount to the bhabi and whatever.
No.
Okay, so what does happen at that? It
No,
is
the law,
liable that they are getting the share, right?
100% they will get the share. The law is
Okay,
very
great.
clear, and no objection will ever survive in this scenario.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Rena, for the question. We have Arvind ji saying a very informative session. An honor to hear you, Vinay sir. So I think people have really found a lot of value from whatever you have shared with us today, Vinay ji. It's also 8 o'clock, an hour passed, and we didn't even realize that it's already an hour. So thank you so very much for joining us. Mr. Rao is also saying really very great session. Thank you, Vinay sir. Really appreciate this, Vinay ji, because a profession that you come from could have made you uncomfortable answering whatever questions ke free make you consultation karo whatever, but that is really sweet of you. You have answered all our questions. You have given us so much information today, and we look forward to having you more times on Power Up.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being with all of you on this platform, and thank you, KV Premraj, for inviting me to this wonderful platform.
Thank you. Shravani is saying, sir, what are the qualities you think one should have to aspire becoming an advocate and pursue law? Sir, thank you very much.
Just aspire to be a lawyer and pursue the law. Qualities will come automatically as in by way of experiences. You
Sometimes it
learn
is
as you progress. Yeah. So if you decide to, you don't have to think about your qualities. The qualities will automatically come to you by getting an experiences. And if you want to
wow.
be a lawyer, just pursue the law and be focused. That's it.
So Rena and Nancy also saying thank you so much. And thank you each participant for being so participative, being so active. being here with us for an hour and, deciding to take a decision to be here, listening to Mr. Vinay Vyas and not be anywhere else. So congratulations for that also. So thank you, Vinayji. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you more and more with us. It was indeed an extremely informative session and has helped all of us here today. Thank you, Premraj ji, for bringing real Kohinoor diamonds here on this platform and, bringing so much value to this platform only because of that. Nisha has put in the link for tomorrow's meet, which is going to happen tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. If any of you like to join us as guests, we will be very happy to see you there. And I'll now hand it over to Premraj ji so that he can tell us a few words about Vinay ji, and then we can wind up.
Thank you, Vinay. Thank you for your time. The
Pleasure.
cool, calm, and composed demeanor that you bring to the table is enchanting. You have given us clarity and enriched our knowledge about some legal facets of our lives. Your precise, logical train of thoughts adds weight to your submissions. We wish you continued success in all your endeavors. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinay ji. Thank you so much, and we'll see you very, very soon. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night, and please join us tomorrow morning if you wish so. We would love to see you there. Good night. Shabba khair.
Yeah, good night and thank you. Bye.